had me.
No, you were muted there.
I was muted because I have no control over your microphone. We have two computers going on like behind the scenes. That way I can manage the comments and Andy can do the slides and other things like that. Welcome. We are so glad that you are joining us today. I'm going to move this microphone so I can actually see my computer. And just want to let you know we do have a deep dive today. So be sure to check the community tab on our Facebook page and it'll take you there towards the end of the live stream. I'll also drop the link so that you can go to it directly. So we're so glad that you guys are here. We have a newbie named Stephen. Glad you're joining us. We have people from all around the world, from England, which will be very interesting to hear your take on things, from Sweden and from Scotland. And then Brian is... I always forget where Brian's from. I know he's not from the United States, but so glad that everybody's joining us here today. We're going to dive into the topic. So, Andy, let's talk about the topic. What is the topic?
Places.
And what do you mean by places?
What do we call places?
You're not very helpful.
That's exactly what we're talking about. What do you call places?
Mm-hmm. So what do you mean by that?
Well, when you're recording where something happened or when something happened, you're putting a place to it, a location.
Okay.
And how do you identify what place that is and some of the problems that can come up with that?
All right. And we're particularly talking about putting places in our family tree and then sharing our family tree with others, because honestly, if you're creating a tree for yourself, it doesn't really matter what you put in there. But as soon as you start sharing it with others, then you start running into some problems. So we're going to talk about location or ubicación, the Spanish way of saying location. You can drop in other ways of saying location in another language if you speak. But yes, we're going to talk about locations. And there are a couple of things that people will bring up. Here, let me hide that current comment. A couple of things that people will bring up when we're talking about location. Andy, we go ahead and talk about this one.
So this is in Pennsylvania. One of our viewers brought up that the county names just changed. And a lot of that has to do with growth. You know, when you first settle there, then basically everything is part of that settlement. And then maybe they divide it up into a couple of counties. And as they grow bigger, they keep on slicing off parts to form new counties. And so over time, what was one great big huge county, 300 years ago is now some little county today. And there's lots of other counties that are part of that original big thing. And so knowing when something happened can be extremely important in trying to figure out where it happened.
Exactly.
And I would say this just to add on to this. Mm-hmm. So with this, there's also one of the other things that I'm not sure if Pennsylvania had this problem, but renaming counties.
Yes.
So it's not just that you divide a county and make a new county, but you take a county and you get rid of the old name and you give it a new name. And what would be really frustrating, and I don't know if it has happened, but somebody out there that has done some research might be able to tell me, is if there was a county that was renamed, and then let's say 50 years later, that state decided to reuse the old name of that old county. And so now you have two counties that have the same name, but depending on what period of time would depend on where that is. So just to confuse people.
True. And then this one brings up an interesting point when you have names that officially changed over time. I'm most familiar with the one from Canada where it was Ontario, then it was Lower Canada. I always have to think of the river in order to figure that out.
It's the opposite of what you think.
Yes, it is.
Ontario is lower on the map than...
No. It's lower on the river.
Lower on the river.
Than Ontario is.
Right.
So I always get confused. But then they seem to help me out by going Canada East and Canada West, and then finally just Canada. And so
which none of that included Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta until it was just Canada.
Exactly. And then the other problem is that when you use historical place names, modern maps can't plot it on a map. So then you come into a discussion, we'll talk a little bit later, historical versus modern place name. And things get quite complicated. Lots of viewers have been talking about the different challenges they have, spelling changes, boundary changes, and so on and so forth. But what I found interesting is as I shared on Twitter that we were going to be doing this topic, Ancestry says, thanks for pointing out this problem. Consistency is always helpful. With so many trees and so many researchers, that can be a challenge. We always hope trees are correct and consistent.
Which I just have to point out, there was a question from somebody in relation to this exact point that Ancestry is saying. Chris and Mary Farrell asked, would you agree that Ancestry are the biggest offenders when it comes to place names?
Well, I'm not sure if it's Ancestry that's causing. Oh, that covers me up. We won't do that. Never mind. We'll come over. We'll just do this one. Okay. I don't know if it's Ancestry or Ancestry users that are the biggest offenders. I do know two things that cause a problem. One, the prompts that show up for you to select a name tend to be what you've put in your tree already. So you just keep making a mountain out of a molehill. Over on FamilySearch, by contrast, and Chris did share with me a comment about what WikiTree does. We'll come back to that a little bit later. But FamilySearch at least has something where they're trying to get you to do the standardizing of place names. There's even an app, or not an app, a task that you can do in the FamilySearch mobile app called Improving Place Name. And so it will leave the name as is. And then what you're doing is just creating a link to that name. So if Ancestry had a whatever you want field, and then had a, let's try to standardize this to put it on a map field, then I think it wouldn't be so offensive. So are they the biggest offender? I think some of the things we're going to talk about are the biggest offender. So I'm not going to totally pick on Ancestry, but the fact that they don't have that second field, very similar to what FamilySearch has, or even what somebody's going to comment later about Roots Magic. We'll come to those in a moment. So
real quick, I just have to highlight, because this just came up right here, this post. So if
Which
you
one?
can just, from Francis Osong.
Yeah, I got it.
So I'm from Hampshire, England. Now I'll tell you right now, before I even read all of that, I saw Hampshire, and in my mind, I thought
New Hampshire.
New Hampshire.
Yes.
Which is in New England.
Yes.
But no, this is North Hampshire, I'm guessing, unless it's some other N, England. So just to highlight, how really understanding what place you're talking about, because North Hampshire, England is nowhere close to New Hampshire, New England.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then we've got some comments coming in from our viewers. It would be ironic. I love that people share their thoughts on this channel. It would be nice to get some standards, but as Andy is going to point out, getting some standards is probably a little more complicated than we think. So we're also going to try to tap into some solutions as well. But Bruce Lee, our surname cousin, has joined the YouTube. Thank you so much, Bruce Lee. And why do I say a surname cousin? We're not really Lees. So anyway, all right. So let's go ahead. Yeah, just a second. So another point that was brought up, let me go to this one. All right. And this is the usage of the words like city, county, state, and so forth within a name. And we've got actually several comments. I think this is just the one we're going to talk about here. Go ahead and highlight that one a little bit.
A couple of things in this comment that is important, I think, to know of why things are being done the way they're being done. And she brings up, we use CO instead of county. Well, why did we do that? Well, two reasons. One, when we were just doing everything on paper, we only had this much room to put in the entire name of something. And when we went to computers, Well, initially, there wasn't that much space. The original programmers only programmed, let's say, 120 characters of space to put something. So you would use a lot of abbreviations to be able to get as much information into that space as possible. Nowadays, with all of modern databases, I don't think that any of them have any limits that are appreciable. So if you want to put everything possible as far as the place, there is enough room in that field to put everything possible as far as the place. So that's one thing that's important as we are looking back at records, whether it's old family group sheets or anything like that, or how something got put into a database, why it got put in that way. And that's one of the ways that it was just space, trying to save space.
True. And so now these are all comments on some of our previous videos about place names, cleaning up the ancestry database place names using Family Tree Maker or Roots Magic. You can also clean up the FamilySearch database using Roots Magic, but not Family Tree Maker because it cannot write to FamilySearch. But I did like this comment that said, to be precise is worth it in the long run. Should we mention place names and consistent place names with beginners? And that's open for discussion. What say you in the chat? Andy, what do you think? Is this a topic that we should be talking about to beginners?
I think so, because it's important to, again, going back to identifying when something happened will help you identify where it happened. And if you're looking for records or other associated records, you want to know where it happened, not some other place that you're not going to find anything.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, and this is tangentially related, since you brought up Lee and our cousin Lee, who joined. When we thought our last name was Lee, well, guess what records we were looking for? Everything with Lee, anything with Lee that had the remotest chance to being connected to us. And guess what we found? Nothing at all. Why? Because that wasn't the correct thing we should have been looking for. Now, we didn't know that. But if you are looking in the wrong place, you're probably not going to find what you're looking for.
Absolutely. And so that also ties to the modern versus historic place names. We'll come back to that here in a little bit. Tiffany says, yes, meaning should we be teaching the place names and being consistent with place names to beginners? And she said, yes, it can be a habit from the beginning. Then they will not have to go back later and change everything. Yeah, I think place names and just the idea of being consistent, right? Setting a standard and being consistent is the most important thing that we can do. And that I think that is something we could teach beginners. I just remember working with beginners at the family history library and as family history consultants. And I know they get really, really overwhelmed, but starting with where did that happen, because you don't want to try to remember where it was later, is so, so very important. Jennifer says this, correct habits from the beginning as well as accuracy and search. Absolutely. The more we can be correct in saying this is Houston, and I think Andy's going to pull this up here in a minute, Houston, Harris County versus Houston, and I don't know if it's county or city, would be so important. So go ahead and take it from there.
All right. So for those of you who aren't from Texas, we used to live there. And let me get this as big as I can. I think that's as big as I can. We lived just outside of Houston, right here. Now, you'll notice that Houston happens to be in Harris County in Texas. Well, if we just go up about 100 miles, we'll find that, oh, there is a Houston County. But Houston is not in Houston County. On the other hand, if you go a little south, you see that Galveston here, it's in Galveston County. So sometimes the cities are in the county of the same name. Sometimes they're not.
Like Dallas County, but Dallas County.
Yeah, let's see here. Where's Dallas? Right here.
Or is it
Dallas?
Tarrant?
No, Dallas County. But then you have the capital of Texas, Austin. It is in Travis County. Well, there is an Austin County. It's not where Austin is. Mm-hmm. And most of these counties are just a couple of spots over.
I hope you can see that. The mouse is a little bit small. Maybe Andy needs to do the whiteboard or something. But I hope that you could see where he's trying to say they're far apart from each other. Was that all you wanted to say about that? Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, so now we're going to go to the debate. All right. Tell me in the chat, which one do you use? Historic place names or modern place names? And here's a bonus question. Does it depend on the platform you're using? I'm going to go ahead and take a couple of quick comments here while I'm waiting for you to participate. I'm researching a family where, I don't know how to say that, they were living, but it changed the name a few decades before I was born. So the records assuming was in the township. Okay.
Well, while people are looking at that, Joshua just had a question. DNA related, completely unrelated to this.
Would you want to take it right now?
I'll take it right now.
Hold on a second. Let me switch it here. Thanks for the super chat.
Is 23andMe's R-CTS241 a legitimate haplogroup, scientifically speaking? And the answer to that is yes. What the CTS241 is telling you the last SNP that you have that basically distinguishes you from everybody else right in the group right above you. So it is part of the R haplogroup, and that CTS241 is basically a sub-haplogroup of that bigger haplogroup. And as we do more and more research as far as testing of people, we're finding more and more haplogroups, of course.
Awesome. And he just went ahead and said, thanks. You're very welcome. And thank you for supporting us in that way. All right. So let's go back to the topic of historic versus modern place names. And we have a couple peanut gallery comments. Is that Seamus? Seamus says both. Suzanne says, I'd rather use the historic place name, but everything seems to prefer modern. Everything is too superlative. Ancestry prefers modern place names. FamilySearch, because they use those two-tiered the two place names, the one you put in the standardized, you can put the historic in the primary one, and then the standardized field, you can go for the modern. And sometimes they'll use historic as well. But so it all depends on the platform, because our Wikitreeers can go ahead and drop in now, and spoiler alert, what they do on Wikitree.
And I will say this, the reason why this matters is because you can transfer stuff between platforms, not necessarily always directly, usually through a third-party application. But let's say that you put everything into Ancestry in Ancestry's way, with the modern county and the historic county in parentheses, and then you download that as a GEDCOM, and through Roots Magic, you merge it with FamilySearch. Well, FamilySearch doesn't do it that way. And so it's not going to necessarily find those places.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so there were some more comments. Chris has this one, regardless of whether it's modern or historic, we have to be aware of when we're transitioning from one location to the other, what is the standard way that they organize their geopolitical name? And so in Ireland, right? Ireland, it is County Kerry, County Galway, County all the rest of it.
I learned it's Galway.
Galway, I'm sorry.
It's not Galway. That's what us dumb Americans say.
Well, blame it on being from Texas.
Yeah.
I can just talk about oil if you want.
But it's funny because somebody else had, this is further up in the chat, but somebody else had mentioned some other county in Ireland that had changed its name, that it used to be called Kings County, but now it is County whatever it is, not Kings. So not only did they change the name, but it looks like they changed the order that they're using the county in. Because it makes no sense to say County Kings.
Right.
Kings County. So yeah.
And then Francis had made this good point. You need to add county as well as many U.S. place names, because they're the same in the U.K. So true. And then also Paris. Where is Paris?
That's a trick question.
It is a trick question, because there's a Paris, Texas, and they have an oil derrick with a cowboy hat. No, they don't have an oil derrick. They have an Eiffel Tower with a cowboy hat on it.
It looks like an oil derrick.
And it does look very much like an oil derrick. So if you're from Texas, you're like, What? It's a little confusing.
People are saying Idaho. I've heard of Paris, Idaho.
Oh, there
There's
you go.
one in Missouri too.
There you go. There you go. All right. So definitely we had some votes for historic. We have some historic. They're usually historic. It depends on the person. If they're living modern, well, of course, the more modern you go, the more, because historic place names is tied to when did that person live there? What was it called? Now, why? Okay, I'm going to catch up with all of this, Mike, because I'm talking and looking at the comments. So the key point is, for those who advocate for historic place names, is that if you use a historic place names, you're telling people where those records might be found. So if you had a original Virginian colony, not the United States, but a colonial record, then that would tell you need to look in a completely different archive than if it was the state of Virginia. And the same thing goes with county. If there was a county boundary change, then you need to look in that original county for your deeds and marriage records and so forth, not the modern one. And so that's why advocates of historical place names tell you to do that. We're going to go ahead and hop onto this comment right here. I'll go ahead and talk about that while I read some comments here.
Okay, yeah, so this brings up a good one, particularly in England, because I know that it is a problem there. For several hundred years, the church and the government were sort of one and the same. And so things were divided up by parishes, basically your church congregation or several church congregations that met there. And that worked great until they decided in the 1800s, you know what, we really need to split this. And so we're going to have civil parishes, which are not the same thing as the church parishes, because not everybody was a member of the Church of England. Now, when they first started that, it was fine because they basically just said, we'll take the map of church parishes and plop down the civil parish map right over it. Well, as membership in the Church of England changed, they, of course, changed their parish boundaries. But the civil parishes were then based on the population of the area. And so what you ended up having now is you have parishes in England and Wales and Scotland, I imagine, that could be a civil parish or could be a church parish that don't necessarily follow the same boundaries, but have the same name. And so it's interesting when you're looking at the UK church records, a lot of people put their parish on the census forms, which in the early census forms of 1841, 1851, and all that, well, that's probably talking about the church parishes. But when you're looking at later church forms, they're probably talking about the civil parishes at that point.
Talk about confusing. And why didn't our ancestors know they needed to simplify things for us so that we can find them? I don't know.
And then the last part of this, nobody wants to record any UK address to end with United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which is the proper name of that governmental institution.
So we're going to go ahead and talk about proper versus colloquial here. So there is a debate over whether you should use US, USA, or United States of America.
Or United States.
Oh, did I forget to say United States?
Yep, you did. You forgot. See, it's easy to mess it up. Because, and that's what's interesting about that. Just for the United States, 4 different ones that if you look at the different platforms, I think each one uses a different standard for that.
Well, I know for sure Ancestry does USA, but they have record collections that are inconsistent within the databases that they bring on the platform. So much so that I'm going to be releasing a video about how to build your tree without messing everything up. You know, because once you clean it, you want to keep it clean. But because within their collections, they stay true to however the collection creator created things, you can have find a grade that says United States of America, and then you could have a vital record collection that just does US, and then your tree is all messed up again.
Yeah, there was something I was going to bring up about that. So I guess, no, here for this, just in general, why would United States be a bad thing to say?
Well, and I pointed this out, and I cannot remember the correct way of saying it, but Mexico is the United States of Mexico.
Yep.
I think they take out the day. I learned from my Texas Spanish teacher, and no kidding, she said "Como te llamo," and that's not how you say it in Spanish. Oh my gosh. But she said it was Estados Unidos de Mexico, and that's not correct. You take out the day. I believe, if I remember, a wonderful viewer corrected me, it's Estados Unidos Mexicano. And that does actually make more sense. But in any case, United States could also be Mexico.
Yeah. And if you're from Mexico, then maybe you actually see United States more as Mexico than something else. Likewise, a lot of people say America for the United States
That's true,
of America. And other Americans, like Canadians and Mexicans and Peruvians and not, might get upset by just saying that, oh, America is the United States, as opposed to America is like all of the Americas.
Yeah, for true. All right. So there is some not debate, but there's some different preferences. So some people, after they watched that previous video where I was like, hey, there's the United States of Mexico, they started using United States of America, and then others prefer the United States because it's shorter.
Well, what about?
But let's talk about the other shorter.
What about USA? Why not just USA?
And that is definitely something I could get behind if we are consistent. But is USA something else?
Yes. Do you want to know why? So back in, what was it, the 70s, 80s, there was this big push to, buy American. And look at that. I'm using the wrong thing now. But, and so everything had the made in the USA label. Well, Japan, I believe it was, got really smart, and they started up a manufacturing city called USA.
Oh my goodness gracious.
So it was made in USA.
There you go. Well, and some other things to think about, because I had said, Andy brought this up, and I'm like, what do you mean colloquial in name? So what's the first one you shared with me?
Okay, so just something in general. How about Santa Fe? Close to where we live, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Well, what is the proper name of Santa Fe? And this is actually the proper name of a lot of places.
Go back. Sorry. Go back to that one.
Go back?
Yeah, because I was still on the slide. You were showing something really great, and I blew it.
Okay. So a lot of people think, hey, it's called the city of Santa Fe. Okay, that's probably close to right, because there's actually a lot of places that are the city of whatever the regular name that we call it is. But in actuality, if you look at Santa Fe up here in the corner, you see it is La Villa Real de la Santa Fe de San Francisco de Asís.
Yeah, no.
That's what the name of Santa Fe actually is. Now, is anybody putting that
No.
on any record
No.
or on any database? But if we are going to say you should use the proper name, not only should we put that, but we should be putting the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland as well.
Back.
Remember, we have all the space in the world now in our computer databases that we don't have to shorten things down. And we want to be as precise and exact as possible, right? That's what we're preached at. And now you're telling me that that's bunk?
It's too long on your family tree.
How much research do you want to get done? And how much time do you want to spend writing out place names?
And then another.
Oh, wait.
Hold on, I'm going to bring that. Let me switcheroo. Okay, and so abbreviations can be problematic.
Very problematic.
Because LA Baby is a Jonas Brothers song. Now, within the song, they give you clues that it's driving down the street at night in the Hollywood Boulevard. So where would that be? That would be in Los Angeles, California. But when you hear the cheerleaders at a certain local high school say, LA, LA. They're saying Los Alamos, but that's too long to cheer. So LA, and Los Alamos is in New Mexico. So we moved here. Everybody calls it LA, and we just call them LA, California wannabes. But really, it is so much shorter than saying Los Alamos.
And just to confuse everybody else, we have a Las Vegas. It's only like, an hour and a half away from here also. It's not the Las Vegas that you go to gamble at.
True.
It's a different Las Vegas.
Yes.
And so when people here are talking about Las Vegas, they're not talking about that Las Vegas.
Right.
They're talking about this Las Vegas. And we're talking, same when people are talking about LA, oh, I'm going up to LA. They're not talking about going to California.
No.
They're talking about going to Los Alamos. Now, somebody else brought up
Louisiana.
Louisiana. That is also the abbreviation LA. And so what we have now is we have two cities in completely different states, plus a state that is nowhere close to any of those. So don't use LA.
And then Robert says he officially lives in the city of Los Angeles, so we're all butchering it anyway.
Well, let's go see if the city of Los Angeles really is, if that's what the actual name is. Let's see here. I'm going to Los Angeles. And
hold on, are you ready?
Well, no, I'm trying to find like the official website, which is going to give me the official name.
Wait, there's the seal right there.
Where's the seal? Okay, yep. Okay. Los Angeles really
Give me
is
a second.
The city of Los Angeles. That's really what the name of Los Angeles is.
There you go. Unless they change their seal. And then that leads you down another rabbit trail. So let's go ahead and talk about another principle you talked about, and that is the place names before it existed. And this is the one a lot of people do. And Andy's like, is that true? So what's the example that you give?
No, that's that don't exist. You're talking about before.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. I have these little notes and I got them all mixed up. So before they existed. So that's the one I am super familiar with, and it drives me batty. And that is Germany wasn't Germany until 1871.
They all spoke German.
They were Germanic states, and there was a failed revolution in 1848 that tried to get some of the states together, and it didn't work. And very few of you know about it unless you're researching German ancestors. In any case, well, and they also didn't have a guillotine like France did, so don't really study it all that much. But in 1871, that's when this country of Germany began. And it drives me crazy when people just say Germany, when actually it was, I'm going to say it wrong, the Duchy of Baden. The Duchy. Okay. The Duchy of Baden. And then you have the Kingdom of Hanover. And all of these different.
And there were principalities. And
exactly.
There was, yes.
Exactly. So if you go back, I mean, the United States, we do have a more modern settling. And so we can be a little more consistent with our places, except for at the county and city level. But then you've got these countries that are constantly changing hands, like Poland.
I see you got to pull up, because I pulled this up on Wikipedia.
Uh-huh.
Look at how long this article is. Now, Poland has gotten like the short straw in history. So if you guys have ancestors from Poland, you can raise your glasses knowing that your country or countries got the short end of the stick. Here is the article in Wikipedia about basically just the land area of Poland. This isn't about Poland overall. This is just how the territory has changed. And they go back to 992 all the way to present. That's just the table of contents so far. That's the table of contents.
Mm-hmm.
There are countries that don't even have that long of a table of contents. And this is just about the territory of Poland. This isn't anything about the culture of Poland, nothing about the demographics, just what the territory did. And then they have maps all throughout here, showing how different parts got taken over, how there was no Poland at different times throughout history. I mean, Poland, the great thing about Poland is it keeps rising from the ashes.
That's true.
So there's something there with the people that they got to exist. So you can't wipe them out. Quit trying, because And this is what I didn't realize this. Sweden had a part in Poland at one point, but Russia and Germany, well, not okay. I just made the mistake there. I said Germany before there was a Germany. All the Germanic states all wanted a piece of Poland at different times. This is Poland still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then Seamus just brought up an interesting point that this isn't Poland, but Czechoslovakia and Hungary comes up as Russian in his DNA, and that makes sense because these people intermixed.
Well, and with Czechoslovakia, if you want to have a second for who got the short end of the stick, Czechoslovakia probably got a little bit longer stick than Poland got, but not by much. Not by much.
Right. But I just wanted to point out one of the reasons why we bring up Poland is that anytime I've listened to somebody talk about how to begin researching in Poland, and I began looking into that because I was helping a friend of mine in Houston, and she has Polish ancestors. You really want to research it. And the number one thing people said, well, and we know this, genealogy is about time and location. And they said, if you don't know what that place was at that time, you don't know which archive to go to. So again, it's putting us back into this idea of a historical place name because it gives us clues as to where to search the records. And so Poland is like the extreme example, at least as far as in genealogy circles and classes that I've attended.
Well, because look at it. Because here, let's talk about the Second Polish Republic and Revolution, 1918 to 1945. So we're only talking about 30 years, less than 30 years. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 major changes in that time period. So it's rather important. You can't just have, it's within this 10-year time span.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's 3 different eras that you got to be looking at if you're talking about a 10-year time span. And in some cases, 21, 22, 24, 20, 19, 18, you might be talking about 7 or 8 different time spans of what the boundaries might be.
Yes, which brings us to the next problem that people have. And somebody has already mentioned this. Let me see if I can grab their comment. No, it flew by and I made a mistake. But anyway, using places that didn't exist. And when it comes to what was America called before 1776?
They used America again.
Well, yeah.
No, and this is FamilySearch is the major culprit. I mean, we sort of ragged on Ancestry a little bit earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time to rag on FamilySearch.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what the colonies are referred to in FamilySearch when you pull up the standardized place names? Does anybody know?
I believe it's some variation of British colonial America.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. As a government entity, as a state, as a country, British colonial America did not exist. Yes, there was colloquially colonies in America that were British. I agree. But there was no British colonial America. You will not find a document anywhere that says British colonial America.
So what then would it be?
Well, that brings up a good point, because again, this goes back to why are we calling things the way we are? Mm-hmm. Now, first off, and I don't know if we go through this. Do we go through the hierarchy?
Yeah,
let's save it for the hierarchy.
Okay.
But so place names of things that don't exist. So that didn't exist. So we've had places of things that didn't exist yet, and now we have places that didn't exist. So for instance, if you go and look Troy, Helen of Troy.
Okay.
You could find her in the FamilySearch database. Probably
was
50
she
million
real
times.
though?
Well, one, we
That's
don't
a
know
different
if she's real.
topic.
But 2, then we have Troy itself. Now, and all the historians can debate this or this, but when we're talking about actual records of Troy, we have none.
That's true.
If I understand history correctly. What we do have is we do have the Iliad, which was written by a blind man, which tells you that he probably didn't write it, because blind men usually don't write things down. Not never, but usually don't. And it wasn't actually written down until a few hundred years after this blind man who came up with this story did. And that's basically the only record of Troy that we have. Now, we have some, based on some of the details, some tangential records of where Troy might be, which city it actually was, maybe. But there's debate, as far as I know, in the historical archaeology community about that. So if we have this place that basically might not have ever existed, and we have no records of it, why are we recording it in any database that is supposed to be genealogical facts?
And I love Suzanne. Maybe we should just call it the future United States of America.
That would be more accurate. Except that, there's no records that have the future United States of America. But yeah, so what would you call it? So let's go back then.
So Chris has an idea, and he says, call it the Colony of New Hampshire, or when it was Massachusetts Bay, Massachusetts Bay. So then it takes it back to what I was saying about Germany, and there's a colleague here in the chat who's like, oh, that drives me nuts with Germany, is if it's not really, I mean, it is part of Britain, but if you just drop off and call it Massachusetts Bay, then people know where Massachusetts Bay is in that time period. The more you bring that forward and say Chris is having a latte in Massachusetts Bay, people will be like, what?
Well, but
is that a restaurant?
Here's why Chris is probably right.
Okay.
Here. Because if we go back and look at records, well, Massachusetts Bay Colony was I'm not sure if it was a corporation, but it was basically a business entity that was started up. And so there are business records for the Massachusetts Bay. Now, Massachusetts Bay evolved into what eventually became all of Massachusetts, but in the process, it had to subsume Plymouth Colony, which also has records, because what the whole point of these colonies is, hey, come over here, harvest the land, whatever, send stuff back, plant stuff, send it back, and basically a big business venture. So there's actually records that say Plymouth Colony. There's actually records that say Massachusetts Bay Colony, Jamestown Colony. There's no records that say British colonial America. Stop using it. Stop forcing us to use it. It didn't exist. I'm passionate about this.
Well, and Chris pointed it out earlier. So if you think Andy is on a roll here, go ahead and let us know your thoughts in the comments. You don't have to just hear him rant. You can participate in the ranting as well.
And yes, I know that this makes places more confusing, because Plymouth and Massachusetts Bay are like 20 miles apart, 10 miles apart, yet they were separate and distinct colonies until they were joined together as all one.
Right.
That's just the way you got to do it.
And then I did want to touch on this very quickly, because it does come into this one, and that is, where was Sacagawea's son born?
Sacagawea. So this is interesting, and then here's why I bring up Sacagawea. So for those of you who don't know, when the United States, and this is the real United States of America, I'm going to simplify it to United States so you know what I'm talking about, even though it's wrong. When the United States bought the Louisiana Purchase, the LA Purchase, just to confuse everybody, President Jefferson sent Lewis and Clark. Actually, he sent several different groups, but the most famous one is Lewis and Clark on an expedition to map out, find a way to the Pacific Ocean through this great big huge landmass that we just bought in the United States. And it took like several years. Now, the awesome thing about this is they were, I'm not sure if fastidious is the right word, but journal keeping, record keeping on this was of utmost importance. They cataloged, plants, animals, distances, rivers, all this stuff. They made maps, and these journals are so important that they were protected above everything else. So, equipment lost, whatever, people die, things like that, brush it off, but keep these journals, these records of everything that happened. And one of the things that happened is they met up with a guide named Sacagawea, and Sacagawea's husband was like a French fur trapper or something. Well, Sacagawea ended up having a child along this journey as part of it. And I can't remember where exactly, if it was in Montana, present day Montana, or Idaho, or Washington or Oregon. I can't remember where. But at the time, there were no places that existed. I mean, the place existed, but there was no name. So you can't say that Sacagawea's son was born near Boise, Idaho. Boise, Idaho didn't exist. Now, what you could do is you could say that Sacagawea's son was born, on the banks of the Snake River. That's good, except the Snake River is a few hundred miles long. So where are we talking about? Are we talking about the mouth of it? Are we talking about, in the middle? But in any case, you're trying to record someplace now. And I bring this, I thought of this also because the Mayflower coming over from England, there was at least one child born along the journey, and their name was Oceanus, I think is what they named him. So where do you record their birthplace as? Well,
in the ocean.
Clearly, it's in the Atlantic Ocean.
At sea. That's what everybody's been putting in.
Everybody says sea. At sea, Atlantic Ocean. All right. I'm not sure that there is a solution to that one, but the Atlantic Ocean is very big. Very big. You probably would actually want to say, on the Atlantic Ocean during the journey between X place and Y place, because then at least that gives you a some line of, okay, let's narrow it down where it is, as opposed to, they might have been born there between the tip of South America and Africa. No, they were born up there between England and the United States. That didn't exist.
Well, and then if they're born on a train, then you could say on the B&O Railroad route, blah, blah.
Or airplanes.
Or airplane routes.
And that brings me to something else. Oh, this is cool.
So again, hold on real quick. No. That one didn't cut up. I saw it come up over here. I'm waiting for somebody's... This one. That's the one I was looking for. Ship name and journey.
Oh, yes. So good. The ship's name and the journey, because that ship might have taken lots of different journeys. You could even have a ship at that time that took 2 journeys within 1 year. So it's important that you have that. So that's excellent, Seamus, as far as that. So I just thought of something else. And this is a quirk that we know about because of where we live. So in the United States, on birth certificates, the government requires you to record a physical address. And they've required this for 100 years or so. No P.O. boxes. It's got to be a physical address. Except there are, in the modern times, about 300, maybe 500 or so people who have a P.O. box on their birth certificate here in the United States. And it happens to all be the exact same P.O. box.
Are they on the Witness Protection Program?
No.
Are they on a Pueblo?
No.
Then I don't know.
It is P.O. Box 1663, Santa Fe, New Mexico. They were all born between 1943 and 1945. And
were there a military base?
That's
for Los Alamos.
That is the address.
That's a Trinity site.
Yes, that is the address for Los Alamos during the World War II. Los Alamos is where they did the research and basically developed the atomic bomb. And it was kept so secret that everything was...
Shh, the secret's out.
Yeah, everything was sent. All the mail for this town that grew up that was like 6,000 people. All the mail was sent to one P.O. box in Santa Fe, 1663, Santa Fe, New Mexico. And all these scientists, like the average age is like 29. And so if you think of, 29-year-olds, guys and girls get together, they have babies.
They have babies.
And they had lots of babies because there wasn't anything else to do up here. And so the government did not want to reveal the location of where this was. And so they actually allowed all these birth certificates. These babies were all born in Los Alamos, which is 20, 30 miles away from Santa Fe. They were all born there, but all their birth certificates say P.O. Box 1663, Santa Fe, New Mexico.
There you go.
So what do you record? Do you record where it really happened, or do you record what's on the record?
In that case, I would put just Los Alamos. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So we got another topic. You were waiting for this one, and I need to not put it on my head.
Oh, yes.
Inconsistent geopolitical hierarchy. You're going to have to take that one because
Yep.
you're more familiar with this. I know this is definitely something that comes in for our international audience.
Oh, yes.
Lots of comments came in on our other YouTube videos. You can find links to those there's actually a playlist. It's in the description box for this video. So are you ready to talk about that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
So this again goes back to why are we recording the things that knowing the history behind why this was. Now, in essence, the modern standard of place naming in genealogy grew up from the United States. And so it is very US centric.
Sorry.
Why are you coming over here?
Oh, I thought you were going to show something. My bad.
Yeah.
I thought you pulled something up.
And so we have city, county, state, and nation. Now, there are some exceptions. For instance, in Louisiana, they don't have counties, they have parishes because they were French and that's what they did. But parish equates to county for the most part. So there's not too much problem there. On the other hand, up at least in the Northeast, in the New England area, they don't just have cities, but they also have towns, which a town is different from a city. And they have townships. Now, townships may encompass towns. I'm not sure if cities can be in townships or not. I'd have to go back and look. But you'll notice we don't include townships in the hierarchy. We just go from city to county, and township would fall right in the middle there. Now, why this is interesting is because in other places in the United States, first off, in New England, at least in New York where we lived, the whole of the county was divided up into townships. So now, but there wasn't like a township government as far as I know. It was more of just a space division of something. So I can understand why that's not there. Elsewhere in the United States, they just have that as unincorporated county property. For instance, when we lived in Texas, it was Humble was what the address was, but that's just because that was the postal service address. The actual place that we lived was unincorporated parts of Harris County.
And it was colloquially known as Atascocita. There was even a big A to say you're in Atascocita.
But Atascocita wasn't an actual government entity.
No, not really.
And so
there's a high school there, but no.
So yeah, and so when you think about it, as far as what happened to us in Texas, it would all be recorded on documents as Humble, Harris, Texas, United States of America. Mm-hmm. But Humble is an actual city in Texas. It's about 5 miles from where we lived. Mm-hmm. And it's a really small city. None of these events that we were a part of ever actually happened in that city of Humble. Mm-hmm. So should we be recording them as Humble?
Well, and then one of the things I like to talk about is that you have these unincorporated cities that are in a different county than when people think they are. So my address when I went to high school, we lived in this really small section of Fort Bend County, and it was called Houston. Houston is supposed to be in Harris County because you just spit and you hit the Harris County line from where my house was. Well, actually, it's a little bit longer that, but I'm Texan, really so we talk about spit. Anyway, so my high school was in Fort Bend County. We voted in Fort Bend County elections. There were other, like my brother, he got married in Fort Bend County. Everything is in Fort Bend County. We could not vote in Houston elections because we're in Fort Bend County. All of that is knowing that history is important. So what do I put on my records? Houston, Fort Bend County, because that's where I lived. Because if you're looking for my high school, you're not going to look in Harris County. You're going to look in Fort Bend County. My church was in Fort Bend County. Everything I did was in Fort Bend County, which allowed me to be in the Miss Fort Bend County Teen USA pageant and place 3rd runner-up. But if I had been in Harris County, even though my address said Houston, then I could not qualify for that event. So, these are kind of important things.
And so in the United States, at least, this location name is really determined by the U.S. Postal Service.
Yeah.
That's
Just
really the
blame the
determiner
US people.
of this. But just these couple examples, and these are not even, out in the middle of nowhere examples. I mean, we literally lived 5 miles away from the city of Houston boundaries, and you lived like 200 yards from the city of Houston boundaries. So we're not talking about being out in the sticks.
No.
We're talking about being right next to a great big city, but we're not part of that. And so how do we do it? Well, the U.S. Postal Service says one way, but from a genealogical standpoint, if you're trying to be exact, well, you're going to have some notes to explain.
Exactly. And we're going to come to some loose solutions in a minute.
Wait, we'll go back to it.
Okay, my bad.
Okay, so that is the U.S. side of things.
Okay.
And the U.S., because that's where those standards started up, and that's where a lot of the software started up, they've sort of forced this on the rest of the world.
Okay, I'm sorry. You did want to talk about that.
But the rest of the world doesn't conform to this or even, conform to it in any way. So let's take what I know and what we've actually talked about here, the United Kingdom. So you have the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. That falls into country category, right? Okay, so that's our big category. Well, then our next category is state in the United States. Well, if we're going to the next level down over there, that would be England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, right? But we never do that. We skip over that, and we go straight to the counties, which are comparable, I guess you could say, to the states in the United States. So we skip over the next big one, and we go to the county, and then we get into the problem that's next, because England and that, with their history, didn't develop the way the United States did, and so they didn't have this nice town, county, state system. They had this county system that, as we mentioned before, was overlaid with the religious parishes, which was then superimposed by the civil parishes. And then there's actually, when you get into it, if anybody ever does that's not from England, you have hundreds and all sorts of other things that are all part of it that have to do with voting or taxes or all sorts of different political divisions. And so we have the country, we skip over the next big division, we go to the county, which we're saying is the state, and then what should be a county level sometimes is the parish, sometimes it's one of these other political divisions. I've seen it all sorts of ways as far as what people do, because they have literally probably a dozen or so different political divisions all overlaid on each other, down to the town or the hamlet, which sometimes is like the little towns in the United States, but in a lot of cases, we're talking about 3 or 4 farms together in the outlying parts of England. And that's the little town part. So there's not a clean overlay of mapping that. Now, I don't know about France. I don't know about Germany. I don't know about Scandinavia. I don't know about Africa and Asia. I imagine they are just as complex and don't work well with the U.S. system.
Absolutely.
I think Canada and the U.S. are the only ones that actually semi-work well, and then Canada gets a little hazy sometimes.
So let's go to this question somebody posed, and that is, which language should we use in our family trees? So if we're talking about a place in Germany, should we write it in German? Should we include the SZ? Do I say that right? SZ? I just called it the German beta, and people have been correcting me. It's really fun to be a YouTuber. You get corrected. Anyway, so the SZ, should we include that? Should we include the umlaut? Should we use the foreign language spelling? Here is an example. Florence, or there's 3 different ways to spell Italy.
No, to spell Florence.
That place near Italy, in Italy.
In Italy.
You can see that I don't know anything about Italy. And even Chris had said Italy wasn't Italy until 1861. Is that right?
Yeah,
I think
that was the year.
Yes. And then he also said that it's not really Italy, it's a longer name too, and people don't use it.
And people don't use it.
Yeah.
It's just as bad as the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
So what say us? Should we be, when we cross into another language, Spanish, Portuguese, Russian, so on, should we be using our own native tongue on the tree, or should we be using the native language of where our ancestors lived?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say you should be using the native language, maybe. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be pretty definitive on that.
No, for those of us who are channel members, go hit the icon for it depends.
Well, and because Anna, is that who it is? Mm-hmm. She brought up a great thing with Florence. In English, we call it Florence. My guess is that if you look at the Florenz and the Fiorenze, they probably are different dialects of Italian. Mm. And depending on, it might even be what part of the city you're from as to what you call it. Possibly. So in that case, which one do you call it?
True. Very true. Thanks, Stacy, for dropping that. It depends.
And so but going on this, if we say you're going to record it in the language of the area, what about Switzerland? Do we record it as French, as Italian, as German? And why aren't we recording the country name in their language? Mm-hmm. So, for instance, Germany, we put Germany on. We don't put Deutschland.
Some people do.
Okay, good. Good for you guys. You're confusing everybody. Go back to what we just said we shouldn't do.
Not necessarily. Okay, because there's two things that I wanted to bring up. There's two things to why. I don't have an answer. I really and truly don't have an answer to this. But I do know that FamilySearch and MyHeritage are working to kind of give us a workaround. That if you put it in your own native tongue, that's fine. But FamilySearch has the ability to change the entire site to the language which you speak. So go ahead and put it in the language in which you speak, because that's what you understand. Other users will go ahead and switch it to their native. Now, I don't know if they actually changed the place names to the foreign countries, but you can access the website in foreign languages, and you have a worldwide membership using their native languages. So the searches can be in that native language. I know on Ancestry, when you use a certain record collection, it'll put a big box that says these records are in this specific language, so try the native variation in order to search these records. So that might lead you to go ahead and put those names in the foreign language so that the hinting and the searching is a little bit easier. But I also know that over on MyHeritage, one of the great things that they have been promoting is that they will do the foreign language conversion search for you. And that is really pretty powerful. And because they're based in Israel, because they are a non-US country, they know that people need to be leveraging these different languages. And so what should you do? I think you just need to be consistent. You need to either pick your native tongue through the whole family tree that you put on. But if you're in a collaborative environment and you have a lot of people who are native Italians working on Italian ancestors, then maybe you need to start putting the places in the Italian variation. So it just depends on where you're researching, if you're in a collaborative environment, and then what platforms are able to do for you. So that's what I would say there.
So I want to go back real quick.
Yeah.
This comment here.
Okay.
Corinne, she talked about, it's interesting to hear the U.S. use of town as equivalent to hamlet. Uh-huh. Let me preface that by saying, we use town for lots of different things, and it depends on where you're at in the United States as to what you mean by town. Now, in New England, New York, and then Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and that, they probably mimic more to what those in the United Kingdom would call a town when they're referring to town, because they also have villages and stuff. And I bring this up because this is where we used to live in New York. There was Saratoga Springs and Malta and Clifton Park. Now, Clifton Park where we lived, down here, if I remember right, was the village of Clifton Park. That's what its official name was, the village of Clifton Park. Whereas
Jonesville is our hamlet.
Jonesville was like the hamlet. We actually lived right next to the fire station here. Okay. So
But
Jonesville was like the hamlet.
But we didn't put Jonesville on anything. We didn't create any records in Jonesville. Even our address wasn't in Jonesville. But when you're driving through, their signage just said, "Welcome to Jonesville."
Welcome to Jonesville, yes. On the other hand, I can't remember if Saratoga Springs was a town or if it was a city. But all throughout here, there would be villages, there would be towns, there would be cities. And they were all overlaid by townships, which encompass them. Once you get outside of New England area and you get to the rest of the United States, we might use town for something that's just really small. It might be the official name of something. Like you could actually have the town of Columbus, Ohio, and Columbus might be 1 million people. Or you could have, the town of Springfield, and Springfield is 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's when I say town like hamlet, I'm sort of thinking, where I live now, when we think of towns, we're thinking of little tiny places because we don't ever use hamlet, and we rarely, if ever, use village.
Yeah.
The only place that I've seen village used is up in New England.
Yeah. There you go. And Ribble Gibble says in England, wait.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was hiding the other one.
No. It becomes town depending on population increase and new building houses. My village of Penwortham is now a town because of its growth.
So there's actually a nice progression then as far as from hamlet to village to town, it sounds like, to maybe even city. In the United States, there is nothing like that.
Right. Yeah, because and Suzanne points this out. We, I think, consider us living in a town because we're less than 10,000, smaller than Los Alamos. That's interesting. But it's called a city on their website.
Yes.
All right, so let's go to the ultimate question, the unpopular opinion that Andy has. We have been arguing about this for quite some time. And first of all, I'm going to go ahead and give you some solutions that people have, and then let Andy have some final words before we wrap things up. We'll have a few minutes for some of the other comments that people have shared. In Roots Magic, it allows me to use our historical place names with a hidden standardized name for geocoding. And we did have somebody in the chat talk about, that was Joshua. He's a first timer. Maybe we should start using grid coordinates. That's a potential option. And FamilySearch kind of yet does some geocoding in the background, which is why Roots Magic and FamilySearch can talk so well to one another. But MyHeritage and Ancestry doesn't really have anything like that. If you upload your tree and it had geocodes and then try to download it from Ancestry to another database, the geocodes are stripped. So that tells me that they're not keeping the geocoding. Another solution, this is Chris. He talks about Wikitree. That Jenny and Wikitree connect to Google Earth. When you put in a place name, some projects require historical place, but they make sure the historical links with a place on Google Earth. So that is a solution that some people have come up with. So those were all of that. So Andy, what are your thoughts on, is this a solvable problem?
No, it's not.
Okay.
It's simply because there's too many variables involved. And it starts with, what is the purpose of listing the place? Is the purpose to identify the place that something happened? And I would argue that yes, that is its purpose. And then you could also ask the question, is the purpose of listing the place so that you know where to find the records? And I would say, yes, that is also the purpose. You may be thinking, well, those go together. And I would say, no, they don't always go together. Go to Sacagawea, her son. Well, identifying the place is going to put it somewhere in current present day Idaho, Oregon, Montana. But you're not going to find any records of his birth there. The only place you're going to find records of his birth is in the National Archives with the Lewis and Clark journals. That's it, because that is the only record. And that is 2,000 miles away from where he was born. Likewise, as we've talked with all these other things, you have the idea behind a standard is one, so everybody can use it, and that it can be useful for everybody. As I think, as we've talked about today, there are enough things that you are either making it so that it works really well for a few people and everybody else has to have workarounds on it, or everybody has to have some workarounds and it works moderately okay for everybody. And I think the working moderately okay for everybody is the best that you're going to get. Because what we're doing is we are trying to, let's put it this way. If we were starting with genealogy in mind and we all were part of the government and we were clean and it's like, okay, we got to start our record keeping. We got to keep the genealogists in mind when we're keeping these records. Then I think we could have a nice data set throughout the world that is uniform and works well with everybody. We all play nice in the sandbox and we go on. That's not the case with genealogy, except for very few record sets. Almost everything was designed for some other purpose, and it probably does that other purpose well, or maybe it doesn't. But we're fitting this square peg into a round hole for genealogy all the time, and so that's why I think it's an unsolvable problem. You're always going to run into these problems with name and places, and you just have to keep that in mind as you're looking at it.
And so I want to go ahead and hit a couple of the comments before we wrap this up. We do have a DNA live stream for channel members coming up as soon as we wrap this up. I put the link in the chat. All right. So I like how Louise says, I've given up trying to be perfect at place names and just do my best to be consistent. And I think that's the most important thing. We've got to pick a standard and stick to that as much as possible. At this point, I'm doing my best to be consistent. I have a lot of past entries in my tree to get in order, though. And to get your tree in order to your chosen method of consistency, make sure you check that playlist in the description. It talks about locations and cleaning up your tree on Ancestry and FamilySearch using either Family Tree Maker or Roots Magic. We talked about that one. Oh, just by the way, Robert Bell wanted to say, El pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de los Ángeles de Rijo. I can't say that last one. In English, the town of Our Lady, the Queen of the Angels of the River. That word. Por see, Spanish, the letters are what you see, but I don't know how to put an IU together in Spanish. So that's what's throwing me off. So thanks, Robert, for telling us that. Now, Stacy made this point that when we're using historical place names, we do assume people know their history. And I would like to say that it's an invitation for people to learn their accurate history. Does that make sense? I know people aren't going to know that Baden was not part of Germany until 1871. But if I have it on my tree that they're in the Duchy of Baden, then somebody goes, why is that there? And then it becomes an invitation to dive deeper into history. And for anybody who has kids who say they hate history, one of the reasons is we're not making it personal. And so I became interested in the history of Baden and all the changes it had once I saw my family tree that talks about, oh, they left after this failed revolution. So yes, we do. I wouldn't say we're assuming, we're just inviting. I like to think of it as an invitation. I could be wrong. And then another poll for latitudes and longitudes. I think when we can actually place something on a map and we can find the geocodes, the latitudes and longitudes, it actually could help future genealogists know what we're talking about and avoid some of the craziness. We've talked about the city of Houston is ginormous. But if you go to little rinky-dink town, I call it rinky-dink with love. I've been there. But in Bell, it's kind of like a hamlet. But this little town in Belleville in west of Houston, it has a really, really tiny town, unless it's exploded since I've been there. And I was a color guard co-teacher. It was really tiny. So if you say Belleville, you can get within a couple miles of where that location can be. But if you say Houston, every Houstonian's like, oh, really? You're from Houston? What part? And then you tell your quadrant. Oh, really? What part? And then you say like Sugarland. Oh, really? What part? And then you say your neighborhood.
Down and down, smaller and smaller.
You wouldn't actually put it on your genealogy tree, right? But so yeah, the latitude and longitude can overcome Houston versus Belleville. One other couple things. And a number of people keep saying, let's maybe just put the future Los Alamos, or going back to Sacagawea, the future Montana, or wherever it was. Ribble Gibble had a good comment. Voting bureaus in England can be as small as a few hundred people. We have micromanaged districts, kind of sub-parishes. And I believe Canada has these districts, these I can see it, but I can't say it. But it's Niagara and something. When I'm talking about Lincoln County, Ontario, it keeps putting this other thing. And I'm like, that's not where they live, because these records say something completely different. So, but all in all, to wrap it up, is consistency is probably the most important thing. And then Stacy, thanks for helping our newbies. So there's a join button next to the subscribe button. So the subscribe, we're trying to get to 100,000 subscribers in the near future. So if you haven't subscribed and you like this content, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Help us reach that goal. There's more perks that come when we hit that milestone. So we'd really like to get that. Next to that is the join button. Oh, first I should say subscribing is free. You don't have to pay any money for that. But when you hit the join button for,
I think it's $2.99 a month,
there is access to members only content. And if you go to the playlist tab on YouTube, you'll see the members only content. And there's segregated by organization, DNA, research tips, writing tips. And you have access to that entire archive of old videos. And so if you would like to do that, that would be great. Final more comments that came in right at the end. Matt Potter. I don't know if you're a first timer or a longtime viewer, first time commenter, but I think there can be standardization. And I think there can be, which is why Andy and I disagree. He worked at a job of websites and business statistics processing, and you can do this. There are some exceptions that we mentioned, but it could be better. I totally agree. And I think MyHeritage is trying to move towards standardization, because they do have a place where you can search a location and you can grab a geocode, and you also have that ability to put whatever you want in the main field, and then they'll also ask you about the historic. FamilySearch does it a little bit better, because there are two fields. There's the one you write in and the one they ask for standardizing. They also tell you in this little hint, hey, that village didn't exist before 1805. Do you really want to use that name? And so it stops you to think, because then sometimes it'll give you some other options, and then you can pick the more historically accurate one as the standardized name. I think we really could do better, but it all comes down to users. What are users willing to do? And then I just keep coming to the question for the genealogy hobby. We keep talking about the genealogy proof standards and do the genealogy standards, and yet there isn't standards when it comes to place names and other things throughout the genealogy sphere of what name do we use and what place do we use and what this, that, or the other. And so Andy's favorite thing to say, let's be a little less rigid, but then you combine that, just be consistent in what you're doing. And if when in doubt, add notes. So that's about all we have to say for there. Thank you for all our new channel members. Thank you for all you first-time watchers. Go ahead and hit the like button if you haven't done it already. Share, because sharing is caring. Share this videos for others. Let's have this conversation, keeping it going. Who knows? Maybe some of the industry influencers can try to merge towards and work towards more standardizing, so we're not always frustrated going, where the heck was that place? All right, thank you guys so much. Give us about 2 or 3 minutes and we'll get ready for the deep dive.